This is Vital Signs, a podcast on cutting-edge trends in health tech and the people shaping them. And today we had a fascinating conversation with Sean Duffy, the CEO and co-founder of health tech unicorn Omada Health. We talked about large language models and where they fit into Omada's virtual first chronic care offering in the future.
It's going to be so transformational over the next 20 years. It's almost hard to describe. It's going to reinvent the healthcare system.
We also hit GLP-1s and where they'll be incorporated.
At the end of the day, a GLP, what it does is support the quantity side. It leaves you feeling less hungry. You tend to eat less. You'll reduce calories.
And also hit on how Omada was an early pioneer in employer pricing.
There's this whole first principles view that I've always held, which is your pricing model should align with your value.
I think folks are really going to enjoy this episode. Sean, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, honored to be here, Jacob, Nikhil, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, to start, I think would love to just get, a bit of context on how you came to start Omada. As I understand it, you were like an MD, MBA at one point, and, would love to hear where the idea came from. And obviously you've been running the company for 12 years. How's it kind of changed since the beginning?
Most importantly, do you regret coining the term digital therapeutics?
We'll get into it. Yes. No, I actually think there's a lot of credibility in the term there. It just doesn't fit Omada anymore. But we could probably spend an hour on that. But where to start? Yeah, the Omada has always felt like a serendipitous accident in just kind of this amazing way, and one of those true blessings. I loved technology growing up. Did an undergrad in neuroscience, graduated in 2006, which was just this remarkable time in Silicon Valley history. And I thought at that point I'd have to pick tech or healthcare, which I think is a kind of a pretty common misconception, especially back then. So I worked at Google for a couple of years. I realized that maybe the worlds weren't black and white. Went to med school, enrolled in Harvard's MD, MBA, and in this kind of fun serendipitous chain of events, started the company while in med school. And it was one of those things where I asked the dean for a year off, and they said yes. I asked the dean for 2 years off, and they said yes. And then I asked for the third year, and bartender cut me dry. So never went back.
Awesome. So we know what Omada is, but obviously maybe not all of our listeners do. Can you just give us the overview of how it works, what it is, maybe what DPP is? I think that's the category you fall into, right?
Yeah, so we're a virtual care provider. On behalf of Omada, I tend to share that our sweet spot is really between visit care and any clinical area where it's so clear that you need proactivity, you need longitudinal support, that the operational burden of a patient coming into a waiting room, every week, every other week, is just going to impact outcomes and value is an area we're interested in. So we got our start in obesity-related chronic disease, focusing on diabetes prevention and weight. Later expanded to diabetes, to hypertension, to musculoskeletal care. All of those are care areas where the existing care ecosystem is suboptimal. And they're all areas where a virtual first approach stands to not just be incrementally better, but transformationally better, which I think is required in any healthcare enterprise go-to-market.
So you've kind of been doing Omada. I consider Omada one of the OGs in the digital health space right now. I'm curious, how, especially now as digital health is matured as an ecosystem, and everything seems to have changed. What things have actually gotten easier over time, and what things have gotten more difficult over time as you build a business? I remember way back in the day in my CB Insights days, reading some stuff about how you guys were trying to get covered by Medicare, and kind of a lot of those discussions that were happening, as well as the shipping logistics of a lot of the diabetes stuff. So I'm just curious, what has gotten easier, what has gotten tougher over time?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think we were, clearly early for our time. I'll just highlight kind of one conversation that in the early days felt 180 different than the conversations today, because I think that's kind of a statement of where things have gone. So Omada is always contracted as a covered entity. We file claims for our revenue. We're the only in our space that's NCQA accredited. I mean, we are a provider, and we've always had that orientation, from day one. So I remember, early on, even if it was serving an employer, we'd file claims to the payer, and we'd come to them and ask to set up a contract with their network team. And, you'd have these conversations, and they're like, okay, well, but where are your clinics again? And you're like, no, we don't have any. Oh, sorry. Let me just read from the question. Where are your clinics? And it was this very disorienting chat. And I remember we burned so many cycles, dollars on regulatory conversations related to Omada fitting in contracting, as a provider, just because it was so different. It was, it was that scene in Apollo 13 where you're trying to, take the round, square CO2, cartridge and get into the round hole before like the oxygen depletes, which is your bank account in startup language. And now it's not at all, that's not at all the case. It's night and day different. It's like, it's kind of an acceptable thing that you can be a care provider without a clinic, without walls, without an office. And that's a really beautiful thing, and is dearly needed.
When you started Omada, like how similar was your vision to what the company's ultimately become?
It's been pretty consistent. It's funny, if you kind of read the early like vision brief for Omada and the early, founding charters, and it's all consistent with where we've come. I mean, the whole goal was to ask the question repeatedly, how might one build a more evidence-based digital health company, which there was a shortage of, when we founded the organization, and it was all against a belief that, at the end of the day, digital health was the underdog back then. I think still, to much, in many kind of pockets, it still is. And those principles, we've held true to, which is, look at evidence bases that we can build upon, generate evidence, always think about specifically what are you accomplishing clinically, why and how, create great patient experiences, and all those are the same.
I mean, one thing I'm curious about is obviously, you sell to a lot of employers, and I think, what it feels like we've seen across the board is a bit of like a fragmentation of care today, right? You've got a digital health provider that's focused on MSK, and one that's focused on behavioral, and one that's focused on fertility, and, it's a bunch of solutions that folks end up bringing together. And I think, you guys have been focused on expanding beyond a single condition. And I'd say, I'm curious, like, what you make of, these single condition companies. A lot of them, I think, have struggled to go multi-condition, and like where we end up in kind of like the set of tools that employers have over the next like 5-10 years.
And just to like riff on that a little bit, like how do the multi conditions actually interact with each other, even as you all think about it, right? Like, does the MSK group kind of interact with the diabetes group? Like, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, happy to share thoughts on both. So relative to where the market goes, I actually think genuinely think you can be successful with both strategies. So 5 years out, there'll be remarkable businesses that have remained singular condition. There'll be remarkable businesses that have, expanded. And that's kind of true in the in-person ecosystem too. You've got Hospital for Special Surgery, and you've got Mass Gen, who has a great orthopedics division. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is just kind of a truth in existing care. And both are credible strategies. We call our strategy selective breadth, because it is extraordinarily hard to expand from single to multi-condition. I thought it was going to be easier than it was. I mean, it takes an extraordinary amount of capital, thoughtfulness. If you want to do a good job, capital, thoughtfulness, you have to educate your customer. They don't just say, oh, we love Omada for X, I'm going to deploy for Y. They're like, where are the proof, points? Like, what specifically is it going to look like? Justify the ROI. So there's a heavy activation energy in expanding laterally. That's why I call it selective breadth. I think you can go wrong in that strategy and just all of a sudden going too wide, because then you're not going deep enough to deliver the results. And that will work near term perhaps because it solves for convenience, but long term you'll fail. And for us, we think we do and should expand, because not everybody has, maybe if you're an employer, a benefits team that has enough people to manage point solutions. It's just, it's really hard to do. So I think mass market employers tends to tip slightly toward, my gosh, it'd be amazing if I could, with one partner, get my key needs solved. Now, if they can't, then they'll stay in the point solution role. But if they can, we've seen it tip toward kind of a platform mindset. So, I think that will continue. And for us, it's about making sure that if and when we do expand, we do a good job in it, given kind of the first comment I started with, which it's very hard to do.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point. And I feel like you've kind of been one of the OGs of the employer go-to-market, which obviously I feel like a lot of folks have kind of, it feels like one of the tried and true go-to-markets in health tech now. I feel like a few things that are pretty interesting about what you guys have done on the go-to-market side. I think the first is around pricing, right? I feel like a lot of other companies, the focus is, okay, we'll get a per employee per month, contract. I think you've talked about some of the perverse incentives, potentially that can put in place for a company, but would love to hear how you thought about in the early days of Omada, what the right pricing model is and how it's kind of evolved over the years.
Yeah, I mean, this is one where maybe ignorance is bliss. Because so many people in the early days would tell me explicitly, good luck building a business that's not PEPM or PMPM. And it just never felt like the right approach. there's this whole like first principles view that I've always held, which is your pricing model should align with your value and in what value you're providing as a truth. And another kind of nice, that's a 1A, and a 1B is don't have your pricing not be in line with your cost of revenue. You know what I mean? Imagine if a restaurant did that. It would like when you should pay for a dish and you should have the price of the dish be more than the ingredients of the dish. So it felt like if you didn't do that, you'd have these long-term misalignment moments with your customer. And you did see that in the PMPM world. I mean, you see a world where it's like, all right, the company is incentivized to have enough utilization and uptake such that the buyer doesn't kick you out, but not too much because it compresses margins. And that's a fail. That doesn't optimize for the best outcomes for the country. So now, in order to do that, you have to get creative because the blessing of PEPM is budget reliability. So, this was where Omada, being a covered entity, contracting, as a provider, and figuring out a way to actually start filing claims. We're one of the first to do that at any material scale in digital health. Was beneficial. So we took our trials to the American Medical Association. We got them actually to issue the first ever digital specific CPT code as a cat-free code that created billing infrastructure. And so then even if we're working with an employer, we can file a claim. And medical expenditures in an employer is by definition variable because you don't know how many employees you have that are going to go, have babies this year or need services. So that can accommodate more variability. But it required a lot of maneuvering to kind of rest on that pricing model. It's become more common. There's, I heard a Mercer consultant, last year say, internally we always say that Omada killed the PEPM. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's it's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like this is Omada walked so that everyone else could run situation, because I do feel like now billing as a covered entity is pretty common.
Yeah, we took a lot of punches on behalf of the space.
So seriously, on behalf of Jacob's portfolio companies.
There you go.
Exactly. What were those like initial conversations like? Getting folks across the board on like on the payer side or employer side.
Was it fully outcomes based, where you said, hey, if A1C drops, we get paid, or are you stage gating what outcomes look like?
We've tried a bunch of stuff in past. We did like milestones on either curriculum or weight loss. We did just charging kind of a percent weight loss. What we settled on, which we're happy with today, is essentially kind of it's a monthly fee, but includes a whole scope of services. And then if someone stops using Omada, we stop charging, and then we'll do like population health performance guarantees. Biggest reason for that is just simpler. It was really hard to explain to buyers like, oh, well, for this percent weight loss, we charge this, and it's on this time horizon. And just, you kind of caught up in confusion in the selling process. But we've kind of innovated and tried all sorts of models, but kind of landed on our current, which I've described.
And I feel like one interesting thing is you guys obviously started, and I feel like many employer facing companies start selling to kind of the jumbo employers, and you can hire kind of a sales force and sell direct to a lot of those folks or distribute through some of the payers. And then it feels like you've also been able to expand into like the fully insured kind of smaller clients as well. Like I feel like a lot of folks listening probably are familiar with the jumbo motion, but like, how do you even go about selling to at least smaller, like fully insured employers?
It's funny. We didn't seek to do so right out of the gate. It was kind of something that happened. And knock on wood, it's kind of been an amazing pattern, that we hope continues. In that, we'd be talking to an employer, maybe that would turn into a partnership with their payer, but it would be specific to their self-funded line of business where they're just administering the benefit. And then they'd see the economics, they'd study it, behind the scenes, sometimes with us involved optimally, but sometimes not. And then they'd say, well, I like what I see. I'm going to write it into my fully insured, line of business because they want to seek savings there. So it's, it's definitely kind of a different selling motion. It's one that's, you really need slightly stronger near-term economic proof points. Now, I think we've got kind of the arsenal needed that more often than not, actually, even kind of new payer contracts we strike tend to include fully insured right out of the gate. But that wasn't always the case, always the case for Omada. So, that's kind of a neat thing that almost, we started to just observe happening and we're like, well, great. And now we've got kind of a more dedicated sales effort against it.
Do you think it's because the payers have gotten more interested and innovative themselves, or you all just have more data and evidence to back things up? Like, is it like the system has shifted a little bit and now they're interested in it, or is it like now you've kind of paved the way with proof points?
I think it's a mix of both. I mean, I do think you have kind of, fully insured plan leaders inside the payers that just are a little bit more oriented and interested in the digital health landscape. And so, I think it's probably a balance. Now, that being said, the economics need to be justified in a slightly different way in that market. Tends to have higher churn. There's ways, they still cover new things. They're like a new X, Y, or Z will come out, but there's longer sales cycles. There's different kind of underwriting processes, but.
I mean, to that point on higher churn, I imagine like you have to be able to show, it can't be in the MA thing of like invest up front for a few years and then reap the benefits for the next decade. It's like you've got to have kind of tangible ROI in that first, year or two, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And I guess and it makes sense that obviously as fully insured payers, since they're bearing the risk, if they believe Omada, reduces costs and that it's something they want to cover. Is it ever that, would they ever like lower the price, and be like, hey, if you use Omada, we're so confident it actually reduces our risk that like you can even get the plan cheaper if like you sign folks up, or like, I'm always curious about like the go to market on the fully insured side.
We've not seen that done. There are ways to do things like that. There's kind of all these like regulatory carve outs, like you can slightly do X, Y, or Z within certain bounds. It's not been as adopted as broadly as one would think. I think there's kind of a host of reasons for it. One is just the complexity, and the other is, just kind of focus and prioritization of some of these plans. But so no, we don't see that a ton in market. Though in theory, you could, in certain worlds, do that.
I have a question about we've talked a little bit about the reimbursement and payer aspect of this, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about the care model part of this itself. Because again, like you guys were pretty first to market on a lot of stuff, and I think coaching was one of them, right? Including coaches as part of the care model. Like, for one, I'm curious just like how the care model itself has changed over time. I feel like I remember like peers being a part of it too, and I don't know if that's still the case or not. But like, what does the care model actually look like today?
Yeah, well, I mean, it started from just a belief that you couldn't take the people, out of metabolic care. And that was just predicated on sitting in the homes of people with, prediabetes, with diabetes, recognizing what it would take and just looking at the literature. And it's extraordinarily hard to get, frankly, any outcome at all in this space. Like I would say never will there be a silver bullet. Like you've got to that's why we've got kind of full stack building everything from like the care team concept, the curriculum, the communities, the tech, the devices. Like you really got to drop in the paratroopers to even get any outcomes. And it was clear that the care team was going to be part of it. And so the way that it's changed is it's significantly more sophisticated, thanks to the technology and, all the data science aspects. So I was our first ever health coach. I was just blind, I'm like, let me just look at this person's weight chart and see what I don't know. I'll just try. Now it's much more, augmented. So that's changed, and then we've expanded. So, especially as we've gone to diabetes, to hypertension, kind of expanded new professionals, MSK, we have physical therapists. So, but the principle is always kind of blending tech with people. I think that'll remain the case.
And what do the actual interactions look like, right? Is it like the coaches are proactively reaching out to people? Or are they like guiding sort of group stuff? Like I'm just trying to understand like how they interact.
Yeah, so they're the like interaction model with people. It's you'll have kind of your care team. So let's imagine you have diabetes, and as an example, and you're in Omada's diabetes program. So we'll get you your hardware. We'll pair you in kind of your communities and groups. We'll set you with your care team so that the coach, it's a certified diabetes education care specialist, and then for that patient, and most of it will be asynchronous. It doesn't have to be. In fact, physical therapy is a good example. It's like you really need video visits complementing asynchronous interaction to do the job, because you need to like observe how a joint moves. But the vast majority is just asynchronous communication, because that's our members' preference. It tends to be just how people like to interact, nowadays. So, it's you still, get to know your coach and feel kind of that accountability, but in large part, it tends to shift more toward asynchronous.
Got it. And, we'd be remiss not to talk a little bit about the GLP-1 stuff, right? Because obviously, speaking of silver bullets, that potentially might change it all, right? But so, obviously, like GLP-1s are out. I'm curious, like, for example, like how flexible the model is to include something like GLP-1s. Are you like, where do these meds sort of fit into this? Are you kind of like, hey, we're going to try something else first before we move to the GLP-1s? Like, obviously that's going to pretty significantly impact the touch points, the care model, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, they're an amazing class of medicines. They're not new to the world. We've been supporting our members with diabetes on GLP-1 since we started in diabetes.
So did you know before everyone else, and you didn't tell us?
Well,
That's
I should have set up a
cool.
TikTok. Yeah, exactly.
Seriously.
So we announced a whole set of capabilities to support, diabetes risk and weight, in GLPs. We've made the decision to not initiate scripts, but support anyone who's on a script. So that distinction, is important. It includes a lot of capabilities within the Omada program. Some we brought down from diabetes, but, training the whole care teams, a whole supplemental resources, community specific to people that are on GLPs. They're great meds. Yet our belief is that you really should have a lifestyle intervention alongside that's, highly credible. Because at the end of the day, a GLP, what it does do is support the quantity side. It leaves you feeling, less hungry. You tend to eat less. You'll reduce calories on a GLP-1. Most patients, not everybody, but it does nothing about quality. So if you got quantity only, it does nothing about quality. The moment you stop, if you do stop, you're highly likely to regain, very, very quickly. So that's what you tend to see in the data. The vast majority of the accounts where we're either, eminently live, or in conversations, it won't put us in front of a GLP but rather alongside. So they'll say, all right, for the employees that we're covering these meds for, in order for us to pay for them, we want you to be in the Omada program alongside. And it's made sure to be communicated, not as punitive. It's like, in addition to covering your GLP, we're also going to cover, a world-class experience that optimizes your success on these meds, because they believe that's important. And the vast majority of people that endeavor to, try a GLP based on our research, they're not thinking, I want to be on this for life. They're thinking, well, I'd love to get to my goal and ideally not take this medicine anymore. Now that can be a recipe for failure without, again, the quality and the behavioral side.
Those people have not read the papers.
They've not read the step 1 extension trial.
No, I mean, it's an interesting point, right? Like, I think, you have to stay on them forever currently, right? Or kind of the benefit goes away. And I think, it makes a ton of sense that you, alongside it, can make lifestyle changes that allow you to eventually, get off it. I guess as you see kind of the rapid progress in the space over the last few years, like if you were to put your crystal ball over the next 10, 20 years, like, is this something that like a large portion of the American population ends up taking, or like where do you what do you think the care model of like 20 years, it looks like with regard to these?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. Like you could look at antihypertensives is a good proxy. It's like, probably more people, should be on them than are, but they're, prevalent meds. Now we got that's a long-term destination. I mean, the cost profile of these makes that, just impossible right now. And you're going to need like small molecules to make it through. They're coming exactly. Yeah, for sure. So they are. And then you're going to need like the competitive pressures to, drive down price. I think you can find some economists that say that's a hoop dream. Some think that they'll be, that'll happen. So, and it's not going to be for everybody. So, it's not that these meds don't come with side effects. You do find folks that just have trouble tolerating some of the nausea, it doesn't, they're not, again, nothing's a silver bullet. It doesn't make the Omadas go away. What it does is it's like, great. In an ideal world, we have a whole palette of both behavioral tools, pharmaceutical tools, and our job is to rationalize what's going to work in that person's world, based on where they're at clinically, where their goals are at, and kind of glide and titrate and kind of, find the path for them. So I'm happy they exist. I think it's a remarkable achievement. And it's only going to get more exciting. I think there's like 50 or so that are, in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 right now.
I feel like if I'm in the Omada program and I'm paired up with someone who is secretly taking a GLP-1 and they're doing 5 times better than me, I'm going to be real pissed. like, like that does not seem fair. So out of curiosity, like, look, there are a lot of these obesity management companies and all this kind of stuff, and they have made the active choice to be a prescriber in this case, right? Of GLP-1s or whatever, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be GLP-1; it could be any obesity medication. Like, what is the thought process for you guys around deciding explicitly to not be in the prescribing seat for these patients and more just be a complement to whatever they're doing on the medication side?
There's kind of a couple of considerations. One is, I don't know if the right word is commodity, but it's very easy to get a GLP-1 script. So it's not, you don't differentiate your organization on writing GLP-1 scripts. And I think if anything, the employer and the benefits buyer market and the payer market is a little bit worried about how easy it is, to get a script. So it's been a breath of fresh air, to them for Omada to come in and say, we're going to support alongside a med regardless of where the script came from. So it's not like an organizational capability that massively, differentiates. And there's kind of a spectrum. You can initiate scripts in a very, high integrity way. There's many companies that do that. You can also just, whoever messages you say yes. So there's kind of a wide variety of approaches here, and it's a little bit of the Wild West. What we like about our approach is it really doesn't matter where the script came from. It's, it could have come from your PCP. It could have come from, Roe, Roman, Noom, Weight Watchers, you name it. If you want to get covered for the medicine, you need to have a model alongside. And then we also like that if based on kind of the person's choice, we can encourage conversations with their medical home and their primary care clinician. So even if your route to a script was doing a Google search for GLP-1, if you're undergoing an enormous physiological change of losing, 10, 20% of your body weight, it's probably good if you're comfortable with it to just kind of check in, relative to like your overall care outside of obesity, because you may be on meds that should be adjusted. Like there's kind of secondary considerations. So, what we can do is, regardless of where you got the script, we can, when it's appropriate and as it's preferential, kind of push to the medical home. Which serves our vision of wanting to be that between visit, care provider, complementing primary care. And I think, is kind of a net slightly better approach.
Because we discussed GLP-1s, I'm being informed that we're contractually obligated to discuss the other buzziest topic in healthcare, which is AI and kind of the use of LLMs. And I feel like, I've heard you speak before. I feel like Omada, long before the advent of these multi-billion parameter foundation models, has been using technology to help kind of coaches prioritize large patient panels and manage care. And so I'd be curious, the extent to which you guys have started experimenting with some of these new models, how you think about where they might fit into the Omada program.
Which one do you think is going to impact your business more, AI or GLP-1s?
Oh man, it's funny. That's awesome. Do I have to pick a favorite? It's like
you think about it while you're telling us your AI answer.
It's obviously the AI that discovers the next generation of GLP-1s, right?
No, well, yeah, or it's there is an intersection there that's to be found where they amplify each other. But yeah, it's remarkable. It's it's interesting. I hate to say easy, but one can train a model to kind of surface insights, and all that has been done. The generative aspect is remarkable. It's most remarkable for async communication, which, per the comments earlier, is the vast majority of how we communicate with our members. So it's just amazing what can be done. There's a philosophy that we have that we're going to hold to for now, which is, and we've had this always, you as a care team member at Omada, you wake up, you're like an organized list of, folks triaged against, algorithms and kind of recommendations on who you focus, on and what we recommend you kind of talk to them about. But at the end of the day, you use your judgment as a person and, based on the relationship you have with that member. So that'll stay the same. What we can do and what we're, experimenting with is, support message generation. That's not still needs to be edited and changed and, and thoughtful, but feels more personalized, is quicker, is more operationally efficient, ideally lands better. So that's amazing. And we need to kind of explore whether this is incrementally better or just transformationally better. But I mean, we have kind of a remarkable corpus. I mean, we may have the largest corpus of anyone in asynchronous messages rate, flying back and forth relative to metabolic disease. So we're all sleeves up, and we have we're recruiting a ton of open roles in this space. There's not a day that goes by where my leadership team doesn't hear me talk. It's like a joke inside Omada. If like someone says AI, I'm like, did somebody say AI? it's like all I do in my free time is read about it and play with it. And it's, cause it's amazing. It's going to be amazing for us, and it's going to be amazing for healthcare.
Totally. I mean, I'm curious in implementing these. You're one of the first, companies I feel like to really be playing with these models at large scale with a large training set, over the months of kind of experimenting with them. Curious to what extent you've been, what have you been surprised that it's works like way better than you thought it would? And then like, where do they kind of just like fall on their faces in ways that you're like, oh man, I kind of thought by now they'd be able to do X, Y, or Z.
This would be a great time to reveal that you are generative AI.
Yeah, I'm synthetic. This is synthetic.
This entire podcast was done.
I have 3 synthetic Seans doing podcasts right now live.
Exactly.
All your competitive podcasts are interviewing the other synthetic Seans right now. One of the surprises the surprise is how empathetic the suggestions in these models can be. I mean, you still have to very, very cautious to have kind of a human, tune. But I mean, you've seen that in data even outside of Omada and us kind of noodling here. But it's like I think there's like bedside manner LLM study.
Yeah, but wasn't it just because like the responses were longer? Like, I feel like there was like a little bit of a caveat on that.
Yeah, but there was that caveat. But even if you ask it to shorten the response, you'd be impressed.
Also, what's wrong with that? If it's longer and people feel like it listened to it more, it doesn't make a difference.
Nothing. Yeah, no, exactly. So that's been neat. Now there's challenges. It's the vast majority of these. The big box models. Now you can always go to the open source world and kind of host your own, et cetera. But they're not quite ready for healthcare. They're getting there. It's like some of them will sign BAAs, some of them won't. Some, even the very public that even Google's MedPalm is not yet HIPAA ready. You can't it's like so they'll get there. There's a little bit of a there's kind of, and there's all these FDA regulatory considerations. If you're going to do kind of member forward one, you want to make sure you don't trip a triple wire that makes your technology medical device all of a sudden. So there's there's a lot of regulatory morass you have to, wade through to make sure you're kind of doing, innovating responsibly here. But, that all will be solved.
And you've been talking about the text. Obviously, I'm assuming you're talking about the use of generative AI text-wise for a lot of async stuff. You have these other places like musculoskeletal, for example, where imaging and video analysis and all that kind of stuff seems like it would be a good fit. Like I've personally been spending a lot of time looking at like the video AI stuff because I think that's like a pretty interesting use case because I think people are just really bad at watching video and like noticing things. I'm curious, like outside of text, have you explored? And it sounds like you've been nerding around this internally. So I'm sure there are like other use cases you've explored too outside of just text.
Yeah, text is where we've got our priorities focused, given just kind of the scale of our operations relative to text. But you're spot on. And honestly, a lot of these a lot of these models are becoming multimodal. I mean, like Bard, you can upload a picture to Bard and it'll look at it. And, it's like so that the video I'm sure is next. It's like and there's video specific models. So there's less with the exception of MSK, there's slightly less in reach immediate, near term, viability and potential here, but long term for sure. And it's one of those things where it's like there's a million and one ideas inside Omada on how to leverage these technologies. So you have to kind of start with like, or what are the ones that like move the needle the most? And let's just do a great job at those. So there's kind of a little execution nuance here of doing a great job at the ones that are impact your business and your members' health, the most. So that's where we're starting.
Yeah, I mean, as a CEO, like, how do you think about what the right level of like resources to allocate against? I mean, obviously, like, it feels so transformational for the business. At the same time, I'm sure you've got quarterly goals, and got to go through the basic motions of just kind of continuing to grow and expand the business. Like, how do you kind of think about that?
Well, that's what's crazy. I mean, I was talking to a friend of a friend who's kind of a founding engineer at a company that's like a couple hundred people, only does AI, like builds their own models from scratch, trains them all, and they've got like 6 engineers. So it's research, that's not free, but it's like the remarkable thing about these technologies is you don't need like a 100 million, unless you're like actually paying the GPU to train them. You need like $100 million investment for the skill sets and the capabilities. You need a significant one, but it's, the best thing is the technology is more in reach, than ever before, which is great. I mean, how many people does Midjourney have? I don't know the stat, but it's not a lot.
Yeah, it's like 12.
Yeah,
crazy.
It's crazy.
These are going to be the most productive companies of all time.
I know, exactly.
Which is like coming from the healthcare world is like painful to watch, right? I've sort of joked about this, but I'm like kind of not joking about this, where you look at all these services-oriented healthcare companies, and a lot of them just could never get to a gross margin profile that made it attractive enough to be a large venture scale business. And it's like, well, could LLMs like is pretty significantly increase the productivity of this org to a point where the economics would be worthwhile? And like, I think that's a very valid question to ask about a lot of models nowadays.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, I agree.
Sure. So we obviously need to talk a little bit about the whole Livongo thing,
Who's that?
Yeah. How do you pronounce that? Sorry. I guess just from your perspective, look, the Teladoc Livongo merger happened. I think most people sort of genuinely acknowledge it probably being not the best, at least, acquisition price. I'm curious how that's impacted Omada since that happened, because obviously, you guys were sort of spoken about in the same breath.
Look, for starters, just always had enormous respect for Livongo. They built, an incredible business, a high growing business. Their product delivered value to their users. I think we entered, diabetes, 3 or 4 years ago, innovating on top of what was a lifestyle, intervention, which was great actually, because that's something that Livongo product never had. There was never a weight loss goal, a lifestyle goal. There was no content, no curriculum. We layered on amazing connected devices, as well, and made a big bet in CGM, ahead of the curve. So it felt really good about our differentiation, at the moment in time where that transaction happened. And I think it's no secret that that was a tough one to integrate. And a lot of great talent, was lost there, and that did create, a market opportunity for Omada to be able to come in and say, look, as a buyer, you made a great decision. Buying Livongo, like the world of connected, glucose data was worse before they entered, and it's better now. It's time to bolster those investments with an entire kind of proactive care team and care services layer on top, and that's a message that's been resonating.
That's actually, I feel like in the original Teladoc Livongo, kind of documents about the merger, it kind of relates to the conversation we were having earlier about fragmentation of care. I think the pitch was this will be the ultimate kind of one-stop shop, across episodic care and longitudinal care, and everything will kind of be in the same place. And, I don't know whether one's supposed to draw any lessons from the validity of that approach or not, or whether it's just what happened here was bespoke to these two companies. But curious how you kind of reflect on is there a limit to, having literally every single thing under the same roof?
I think you have to ensure that there's a lot of clinical rationalization on the why, otherwise you don't yield the benefit. So in ours, even with MSK, it's so there's enormous clinical overlap. In fact, the most prevalent MSK disorders, the knee, the back, if you, in addition to PT, can help someone lose weight, that's specifically what you should do. It's physics, it's mass and joints. And so, in that, I'm like, well, that's great. Omada will be the only company with an incredible MSK capability that can also help on the weight loss side. So that's kind of one, that's one example of clinical rationalization. You also, Omada's deliberately not done any acute telemedicine. for a whole host of reasons. We're not going to enter the virtual primary care space. The truth is, despite loving technology more than anybody, you got to do biopsies. Moles need to be removed. Like you can't get caught up in imagining that digital can do everything. So I think that in any platform expansion, you just have to make sure that the clinical pragmatics are there on what can and should be accomplished, virtually. And so that's how it kind of lands with a buyer at the end of the day.
You really threaded the diplomatic needle well there. I gotta say, whoever your PR coach is, gotta get a raise. That's amazing.
Well,
this
we've already established just a very well trained model here that's responding right anyway.
It's the generative AI shot. The real one would have face planted on that one.
Seriously, I want the Sydney version of Sean, to come online. I have to know about this whole digital therapeutics saga that you basically ended up kicking off, I think, by accident. I remember you writing the piece about what digital therapeutics was. I didn't really understand it even then. I am more confused about what that means now. As a bystander who sort of, I think, maybe accidentally started this movement, what do you, why did you come up with the term at all, right? Who asked you to do that?
Yeah.
And second of all, how, as you've seen it evolve kind of outside of your own, obviously, business, I'm just curious, what you think about what digital therapeutics, as a concept, as a term, etc.
Well, my first memory of using it was on a panel, and it was a, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the company name. I'll think of it in a second, but it was essentially a digital diagnostic. And, and I was like, oh, well, you're like a digital diagnostic. Omada's like a digital therapeutic. And the reason why I think it made sense back then is in the early days, we were trying to hold so close to the diabetes prevention program trial, create kind of just incredible parallel consistency, have no deviations at all relative to the protocol, which is actually a credible strategy. What we found is it was an inhibitor to personalization, was an inhibitor expansion. So we had already started gliding to more like a care services orientation, but I still think the term makes sense. And but I think the way that it makes sense is you've got to resemble a therapeutic, which means you lock the intervention. It's you don't change it. There's incredible consistency. There's not a person at all, or if there is a person, all it is to hold you accountable to taking the medicine, but doesn't try to alter the shape of what the therapeutic is at all. You'd have to take a drug commercialization strategy, get reimbursement, get doctors to prescribe. That's been a very hard road for companies, that have tried to do that for a whole host of reasons. I still think it's possible. So there may be a world where that can happen, but it was very clear just based on what we were doing to support our members that our path was going to be less and less and less like the attributes that I described, and more just like a care services organization.
The sort of irony of this too, though, is that now with the LLM stuff and all the AI stuff, maybe you could actually have a fully automated intervention or close to it with a therapeutic effect, right?
We'll come full circle.
Yeah, exactly. You prescribe a GLP-1 automatically. You have an AI coach that kind of wraps around it. Is that a therapeutic?
So, Sean, this has been a fascinating conversation. We always like to end our episodes with a quick fire round where I'll ask you a few kind of standard closing questions. So maybe to kick things off, I mean, we both go to the same digital health conferences, hear the same trends and themes thrown around. I'm curious, what's one thing you think's overhyped and one thing you think's underhyped in digital health today?
The whole generative AI, it's funny. It's the answer is that for both, because I think there are aspects of it that are overhyped. It can't do everything. But there's kind of a critical underhyped thing, which is if you look at just kind of the body of medical knowledge that's accelerating over time and how quickly it's growing. One of the reasons why we're falling flat-footed and getting new advances to people, like a decade for anything like a well-trusted, new advance to actually make it to clinical practice is tough to keep up. And if you ask yourself, well, what is the solve to keep up on best in class kind of treatment options, kind of, et cetera? It's all on text data. It's clinical trials that have come out. It's it's very easy for the LLM to keep up. And if you earn the trust of clinicians to be kind of that sidekick, it's going to make it speedier to get advances to patient care. And that could result in just an amazing fulcrum of time dependency and path dependency on outcomes. So, it's weirdly, I'm excited. There's a lot of hype, but I actually think it's going to be so transformational over the next, 20 years. It's almost hard to describe. It's going to reinvent the healthcare system.
And I guess obviously I feel like there's so many ways that policy intersects with health outcomes and healthcare here in the States. Like, if you could wave a magic wand and kind of make one policy change, what would it be to improve healthcare?
Can I do two? Just so
it's a very powerful magic wand. We'll give you two.
Okay, thank you. Right hand and left hand. There's the simple one that everybody says, but it's just so true. Like, the whole state by state, licensure is like such a morass for innovation. I don't know if I'll ever get beyond that, but that would be kind of just an obvious. That's a known. I think the unknown is we need to find a way to be able to bill for async care using fee-for-service codes. And the reason why that's important is right now, the average physician's life, especially at the level of primary care, is not pleasant at all. You literally do your visits during the day because all billing is structured against units of time billing. And then at nights and weekends, you're bringing down your MyCharts inbox. And consumer preference now, per some of our prior comments, is async. So that would be one. Number two, find some way for fee-for-service coding infrastructure to be able to allow for a billing rationale for async care.
Yeah. How would you do it? Because it feels like, when these systems announce, hey, we're starting to bill, like Cleveland Clinic's like, we're going to bill for these messages, and everyone kind of freaks out because sometimes I guess the payer will just pass it on to the consumer, or, I think the payers are maybe reticent of just this other cost bucket emerging that's just yet another thing they have to pay for. Like, I guess how would you actually go about implementing that?
Tactically, I think what you'd want to do is take the Cat 1 codes that are, in scope to do it, that conceivably could be billed on virtually for services that could be virtual. Build a mirrored code set where you don't change them to accommodate async because then you can't track, but build a mirrored code set for async that has specific kind of rules, building kind of regulations and policies against it. And, and if there is like a modest copay to do it, I think it's actually, probably okay relative to the design. It's like, if that every time you interact with your physician for the next week of interactions, you have $10 that, you'll be set with. I think most people would still do it because they know if it's framed as, well, if I show up in person, I'm gonna have that copay too. So I literally think it starts with coding. You need to have kind of a mirrored async code set. And then there's all these questions about, the policies against those codes, making sure it doesn't get out of control because it can't increase the overall cost profile.
Makes sense. Well, Sean, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure folks will want to pull on a lot of threads that we discussed here. So what's the best way for them to go to learn more about you and Omada?
Yeah, I mean, to any entrepreneurs out there, just if you need help with something, I would love to pay it forward. Just email me, just SEAN, Sean at omadahealth.com. Or, you can learn more about Omada, of course, on our website, omadahealth.com.